The 7th annual Hope Walk Against Domestic Violence will take place this Saturday on the Arthur Ravenel Jr. Bridge. Today, I talk one-on-one with the organizer of this walk, Butch Kennedy, for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Butch Kennedy, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Wow, thanks a lot for having me, Quintin. It's good to see you, bro.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. Obviously, you're well known in the region for being a domestic violence, obviously advocate for the victims. And now, of course, you're the organizer of the annual Hope Walk Against Domestic Violence, which takes place this week. Am I correct?
Yes, Saturday, September 17th, man, 8 a.m.
8 a.m. So who is Butch Kennedy as the organizer of this event?
Right. So plain and simple, man, I'm just a young man, a man who cares about victims, right? We've had a lot of issues in the state of South Carolina when it comes to domestic violence. And then we have issues when it comes to housing victims of domestic violence. So when our shelter is full, our victims have no place to go. So the good citizens of Charleston have been entrusted in me and my organization to make sure that that's one hole that we can fill, right? That's one of the gaps that we get to fill. So.
And leading up to this event, obviously, which is going to happen this weekend, who is Butch Kennedy as a person organizing this event?
So leading up to the event, organizing the event, it's a blessing, right? It's been a blessing to me to get to organize this event. I get to reach out to and talk to some of the individuals who will be sharing their stories about domestic violence on this day, and you know. I'm just an average dude, man. I'm just a young man who thinks that we as men can do better, and who tries to hold men and advocates or service providers accountable for what we do and what we don't do.
Who's holding you accountable for what you're doing and what you're not doing?
Who's holding me accountable?
Yes, sir.
The community. The community does that, right? The community is the one that I listen to. The community is the one that, is the one that says, okay, if it's not working that way, then let's allow you the opportunity to let it work, and let's see how it works that way, right? We believe in the people of Charleston, and the people of Charleston believe in us. They know that every dime that comes from this event goes to victims of domestic violence, and it goes to house, feed, and clothe victims of domestic violence. So the good citizens of Charleston have supported this event for this is year number 7, man. We're excited about 7 years of providing services and housing and clothing and everything else that a victim might need after a traumatic experience.
So as you just mentioned, it's the 7th anniversary of this particular event. Where are you emotionally as a person, not as an organizer?
Right. Emotionally, it's hard, man. It's really hard because we've been doing this for some time, right? And I thought that as a state we'd be getting better, right? But it seems like we're stagnated in one position. Every year you look around and you see where we're at when it comes to domestic violence in our state, and we continue to never move that needle forward. And it's been a challenge, I might say, to get that needle to be moved forward. There's a lot of good people in Charleston. A lot of people don't believe that violence should be happening like this, not especially in our homes, right? But there's a lot of people who stand by and do nothing, right? I call them bystanders. And if we don't all come together and fight this plague together, we'll never end this plague. This is our pandemic, right? This is a pandemic amongst pandemics. And when you have pandemic, the COVID pandemic, you can get a shot, right? To try to help with that. I mean, there's no shot to help with this. There's no silver bullet to end domestic violence. It's going to take a community that's galvanized together, that's willing to fight it.
When you look at the data, Butch, who are these bystanders that could actually curb domestic violence?
I mean, it's just everybody. It's just a community, man. We live in a society that knows stuff goes on, and we just remain silent about it, right? We know things that are happening that shouldn't happen, and instead of doing something about it and galvanizing and doing something about it, we remain silent about it. That's what allows domestic violence to thrive in our communities, right? Because we can hear the altercations going on next door, but yet that's not our problem. That's not our business. That's a family business. Let family handle it. And we see where that's gotten us.
And I know, obviously, as you mentioned, this event has taken place over the past 7 years. What is the biggest difference between 7 years ago and right now when you think of this event?
Well, the biggest difference to me is the support from the community, right? When we first had this event and when we talk about domestic violence, there's really nobody that really wants to listen. But when we have this event and the good citizens from Charleston show up to this event, it shows our victims that the community supports them, that the community is behind them. It's not about Butch Kennedy. It's not about my organization. It's about the community because they know that I've supported them from day one, right? They know that. That's not news to them. But what's news to them is when they walk that bridge and they turn around and they see all those people walking behind them. I mean, it brings tears to their eyes. And that's something that I promised that I would continue to do until the city decides that they don't want to do it anymore, right? So it's a Charleston event. Charleston is taking ownership of this event, and we'll do it as long as Charleston wants to do it.
And over the past, and over the past 7 years, how many victims have actually participated in this event?
Well, we average on the neighborhood of 8 to 10 victims that speak out at this event, right, every year. But there's victims that don't speak out that they're there. With 1 in 3 women that are victims of domestic violence and 1 in 4 men that a lot of people don't talk about, 1 in 4 men that are victims of domestic violence, they show up. I mean, and they listen to these stories, and they, because last year we had the men come out and speak out against domestic violence. And next year we'll have the children come out and speak out against domestic violence. It's all about not only but educational, but it's all about the awareness of the number one crime in our community, right? Everybody thinks gun violence is, and gun violence is, and domestic violence kind of go hand in hand because a lot of the lethality of domestic violence is gun violence, because that is the primary weapon used in the lethality of domestic violence. So.
And I know, obviously, as we just mentioned, it's the 7th annual Hope Walk Against Domestic Violence, and your theme this year is we're all that we got. So, what do you have right now?
Yeah. So what we have done right now is we built a community, right? A cohesive group of individuals that are in this fight, right? That are lockstep in this fight, that are working to end domestic violence. I always tell somebody, if you're a service provider and you're working in the domestic violence realm, you want to end your job. You don't want to work forever. You don't want to be you don't want to be capitalizing forever off this. Your number one goal should be to work yourself out of a job. And that's what my goal is to work myself out of a job. I don't want anybody else to become a victim of domestic violence. My wife and I often say that we're surrounded by a lot of victimization because a lot of the people that we deal with are victims of domestic violence, and they not only become friends, but they become family, right? Once we start working with them, they become part of family. And the sad reality is I wish I didn't know any of them, right? I wish none of them were my friends because, I'd prefer them not to be in that situation than to me to have that friendship. So I mean, that kind of speaks volumes to where we're at as a community and where we're at as an organization when that people who are in these situations, how they grasp upon you because they know that you're going to be there for them. So we're always going to be there for victims, and that's what we do.
Yes, sir. So obviously you're surrounded by victimization. What else are you surrounded by with this situation with domestic violence?
Well, the good thing about it, and the real bonus about it, is that my wife is an advocate, right? So I'm surrounded by that beautiful lady all the time, and I get to work with her hand in hand. Yes. I get to listen to her, speak with domestic violence victims, and then I get the bonus of hearing from domestic violence victims when they get through the process and telling us how much that we meant to them and how much we were allowed to, how much we brought them through this process. And to me, that's where the price of tea in China. So that's the most important thing, is that, we made a difference in someone's life when, all the other doors shut on them. At least we had the door that was open.
Wow. What about this process that has shocked you the most over the past decades of you advocating for these victims?
Well, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. What's shocking me the most right now was that we here in Charleston have closed our shelter. We sold our shelter here in Charleston. We have the domestic violence shelter has shut down. It's closed. Right? They went to a scattered shelter system, which I'm not sure of, but I do know that the people in Horry County are building a shelter. I do know Columbia has a shelter. I do know Beaufort has a shelter. I do know Greenville has a shelter. Charleston is one of the biggest cities in the state. I mean, per capita, I think we should be the capital of South Carolina, to be honest with you. For us to have felt the need to close a shelter and for no one to say anything about it, to me, that's kind of troublesome, right? That's kind of troublesome that no one would say anything, and we close our shelter's door. That doesn't mean that a scattered shelter system doesn't work. It just means that that we don't know what it is, right? What we do know is that our shelter, the place that housed our victims, is no longer there. That's what we do know, right? So we don't know about the answer to the rest of it, and it may very well work. It may very well come out in the wash, but we just don't know, right? So that's troublesome to me because I don't know. So when people ask me that question, I can't really give them an honest answer because I don't know what I don't know. All I know is that when my phone rings, right, it's because they've tried other people and other people will let them down, right? So and I promised the city of Charleston, and I promised my wife that we wouldn't be those other people that let people down.
So when did you, Butch, found out that this particular domestic, violence shelter was shut down?
It happened this year. It happened this year due to COVID. A lot of things are different due to COVID. And my thing is that our organization, all we can do based upon the monies that we get, right, is we can house people for a certain amount of time. And we house them in hotels, which is not really the best answer, right? It's not really the best answer, but it's the best answer for them at that time. Our ultimate goal was to get them into a safe house, right? Our ultimate goal was to hold them. It was going to be like a placeholder until we can get them into a safe house. Now we don't have that safe house to get them to. So now we're trying to find out what the answer is for that portion, right? So I mean, it's hard, but it doesn't really have to be hard, right? It doesn't really have to be difficult. My thing, like I've always said, my thing is that when you're a victim, you be victimized multiple ways. Not only are we being victimized by the abuser in the home, when we get out into the system, right, the system that's there to protect us or protect the victims, sometimes it works for them and sometimes it doesn't. And I'm just thinking that what we're trying to do is make sure that it works for everybody, right? It can't just work for some and not the others, right?
Now, when this particular shelter closed down earlier this year, how many victims that were affected by this?
I say every victim in the Tri-County area. There was only one shelter in the Tri-County area. So every victim in the Tri-County, and they were full, like the majority of the time. So they were full. So they had victims all the time. So their concept is different now, and I think COVID taught them a different way to do this, right? Because of COVID, taught them a different way to do this. But we don't know exactly what that is. We just know that we still receiving the same calls, and we just don't know where to send them afterwards because we can't hold them forever. So.
And how long do you hold them temporarily?
Yeah, so we used to do like a weekend type stay. So because if they would call on like a Friday, we would keep them for a few days, maybe 3 days. But we don't. I mean, to be honest with you, to be in a hotel for that long, that's just not a good environment, a good thing for victims, right? I mean, they need to be able to go places, and they need to be able to feel like they're still normal. You need to be able to be with other people as well. So we can't, keep them isolated. I mean, not in a hotel, you're isolated, right? Kind of isolated. So they actually need to be able to get out because they don't have transportation either. So they're stuck at the mercy of whomever put them in that hotel. And it's something that we didn't want to do as a permanent thing. It's something that we want to do as a temporary thing so we can get them. And not only that, but our shelter did a lot more than just shelter women, right? They provided a lot of services for these women, and these services, I assume they're still being provided. But I deal with the event. I'm not not an advocate, right? So that's a question that's better answered by an advocate.
But let me ask you this, Butch. What are the services that the victims right now need?
Well, not only do they need housing, but they need permanent housing, right? They don't need temporary housing, right? They need housing to where they can sustain. Not only that, they need jobs, right? Because a lot of them don't actually have jobs, so they need someone, the local businesses or someone to help them get jobs, and then they just need what they really need is support. Right? They need support. They need the community to wrap their arms around them and say, yes, you matter, and yes, we care. So that's what I've been working on for the past 15 years, letting victims know that, they have support. They have a support system. Let them know that they're valued, right? That they matter, And that's really important to victims. And then the rest kind of comes to flow, getting them a job, getting through that process. But at the end of the day, they still need counseling. And I'm the counselor, right? So I need to make sure that we're able to get them in that point. And that's what my sister's house can do, right? That's what our shelter could do, right? And I'm not saying they're not doing that anymore. I'm just saying that that's what they can do.
Now, when you look at Horry County and Beaufort County and Richland County and Greenville County, all of those counties really, what
Right.
type of, what would you emulate with those particular shelters that you would try to bring here to Charleston?
Well, so I would probably put Buford in. I mean, all of these shelters, that they have policies, right? And they're all under some sort of grant, so they all have policies. And I think that what they do in Buford and what they do in Greenville and Columbia, they're amazing. I mean, there's something I always tell people: you can't teach a person to have a good heart, right? You can't train a person to have a good heart. I mean, it is what it is. You're born with it or you don't. Either you have it or you don't. And there's a lot of people that when they think about these shelters and they think about the coldness of bringing someone who's just in a traumatic situation into those shelters. It's got to be a homey, it's got to be some type of homey atmosphere, some type of home feeling. I know that if we put somebody in a hotel, after about 3 or 4 days, they're gonna so isolated that they're gonna be ready to go back to that same situation. And I think we just got to do better than that.
And how
We
many
just
of
got
those
to do
people,
better than that.
and how many of those people actually go back to that type of situation after being isolated in a hotel?
You'd be amazed. You'd be amazed. I know a lot of them that have gone back to the situation and then gone back out of it. I mean, when you have no option except for to be homeless, right, or to go back to that situation, and you have children, you have kids, right? What are you supposed to do? You can't live out in your car. I mean, you can't live out in the street. I mean, it's a lot of people. I mean, we're so fortunate. A lot of people are fortunate to not be in that situation, and a lot of people, some people try to say, well, you should just leave that situation, or kind of blame the victim for being in that situation. But when you get in a relationship, man, I tell people all the time, when you get in a relationship, that guy didn't come up and punch you in the face when he first meets you. Because if he did, you would never go out on a relationship with him. You never go out on a date with him. You never have that relationship.
Right.
It's a process, right? It's a process that a lot of victims go through, and those victims could be men just as well as they could be women, right? So it's not just women that are victims; it's men that are victims as well.
Are you seeing an uptick with the men being obviously abused by women?
So here's my take on that, and it's a lot of people don't like to hear it, but there are a lot of men that are victims of domestic violence, but they will never speak out against it because it's a sign of weakness for men to speak out against something like that, and they're perceived differently, right? You're perceived as weaker, right? How did you let her do that? How would you? And it's the same thing for men. People say the same thing about a woman. Why do you stay? Why do you let them do this to you? And there's often the same reasons that it happens with both genders, right? It's all about power and control in that relationship, and how you gain and garner that power and control in that relationship is how that relationship goes forever, right? So once you establish who the alpha dominant person in a relationship is, there'll always be that alpha dominant person in that relationship. But how they treat that other person is everything, right? I mean, you can be the dominant person in that relationship and never abuse your spouse or never speak ill will of your spouse or whatever. But then there's some people, that are dominant in the relationship, and if he or she burns the rice, then it's a different subject, and violence occurs, and then we get involved, and it's just not what people think it is. A lot of people just don't really understand, but it's not as easy to get out of those situations as a lot of people think it is. No.
What those particular calls did you get, Mr. Butch? How many of those calls are from the LGBT community?
Well, so we do have quite a few from them as well. I mean, matter of fact, we were working on a project, and we had a young lady who was from the community, and she's part of that project as well. Domestic violence doesn't discriminate, right? Domestic violence happens to everybody in a can happen to anybody in a relationship. It doesn't matter whether you're black or white, whether you're Hispanic or whether you're Indian. It doesn't matter. Domestic violence happens in relationships. I mean, it's a relationship issue with power and control, And sometimes, it gets to the point where, I think we've lost a sense of empathy and compassion towards our mankind. And I think that as men, that we are the answer to this. We're the solution to this, right? We need to step up. More men need to step up to the plate. And I hate to say it, I can't be the only man stepping up to the plate. I need more men to step up to the plate and say the same thing. And there's a lot of other men that do say the same thing. So, but once younger men and our younger generation realizes that, that's not the way to treat women. I mean, I grew up under the adage that you never hit a woman, right? That's always been one thing. Real men never hit women. But, a lot of kids now are growing up with the adage, if you hit me, I'm going to hit you back. Right, so it's a little different philosophy, a little different mentality between our kids of yesterday and our kids of today.
And how do you separate that, Mr. Butch?
The thing that I do and the thing that I teach men is how to walk away. Right, I teach men. I'm very blatant, very honest, and I like to show. I'm not a person who will just tell you about what it is. I show you what it is and what it looks like. And then once you see what it is, what it looks like, then I explain to you how we got there. A lot of people don't understand how we actually got to the situation that we are. So that's what I do. I kind of studied how exactly how men actually got to this point, right? How women actually got to this point, how we're into the point. And our goal is at the end of the day to have healthy relationships, right? Where we can have open communication, open dialogue, right? So we got to have that in relationships. And as men, we can't have that in relationships because we're taught as men that we can't do that, right? Men are supposed to be strong, supposed to be protectors. We're supposed to be all of these things, and we're not supposed to ever ask for help or ask for anything. So it's kind of hard to get men to come on board and understand how we got there. And as soon as they understand how we got there, then they understand that. Once we understand how we got there, then we can move forward and we can change that dynamic. But it's a culture change that has to happen.
And has any of the men come to you for help personally?
Oh yes. Men. I've had men who have abused, and I have men who have been abused that have come to me, and we've had these conversations, and that kind of started what it is that I do, because we started it with we had a focus study group of nothing but men. We must have had like 15 men that came together, and we talked about this, and we all talked about what our feelings were and how we felt like we got here. And then I had another man tell us about his daughter who was murdered via domestic violence, and that changed the whole tone of the room. And then we had another discussion, right? And that other discussion is what we as men can do better, what we as men can do to this type of situation or being put in this type of situation. So that's what we do on our third Hope Walk every year is we bring the men out, right? And then not only we bring victims out, but we bring men out with the answers of how we as men can be better men and how we as men can challenge one another to end this violence against women. And that's what our job as men should be, to challenge one another and to become better men and to support other men, right? And it's not a competition, right? Manhood is not a competition. That's what I'm trying to get everybody to understand. Manhood is not a competition. We're all men. We can challenge one another, but we need to be supportive when we challenge, right? And expect each other to do better. So that's what we do.
And let me reset and let's talk about Saturday. Who, what, when, where, and how is this going to happen?
Okay, so Saturday we start at 8 a.m. and we're going to be going across the Ravenel Bridge. We'll be meeting at number 1 Cooper Street, which is St. Julian's Divine Center. That's where we'll be set up. We'll have a program. We have speakers that are going to be there. Carolyn Murray from Channel 2 is our hostess this year. So we're excited to have her. This is her first Hope Walk, right? So we're excited to have her. But we have some amazing speakers that are going to be there that are going to share their stories. And that's the important part. We want everybody to understand what domestic violence is. And you can only understand it through the ears of somebody who's actually witnessed it, who's actually been a victim of it.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And if somebody wants to sign up to participate, how do we go about that?
Right. So you can go to our website on palmettohopenetwork.org, or you can go to Eventbrite and just do a search for the 7th Annual Hope Walk Against Domestic Violence, and you can find the information there as well. But our Hope Walk at palmettohopenetwork.org has the information, or you can see us on Facebook. We're on Facebook, Butch Kennedy on Facebook, or there is a event site for the 7th Annual Hope Walk Against Domestic Violence there as well.
Well, I'm looking forward to this great event. Butch Kennedy, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
It's always good to see you, Quentin, man. I love that smile, brother. Keep it up.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.